ELI5. What are 32 and 64 bits in computers and what difference do they make? Essentially, a bit represents either a 1 or a 0. The more bits a computer has, the bigger the values it can use. For example, the biggest number a 8-bit computer can get to is 256. Each bit has two states, either 1 or 0, and we have 8 of them, which means the largest number it can get to is 255. 0 to 255, 256 numbers. You can't calculate anything that has a result larger than 255. Same thing with 32 and 64 bits. 232 4,294,967,296. 264 1.844674441E19. This is the main difference. A 64-bit computer can handle massive numbers at once. LMK. If I need to know more, imagine a calculator that only had numbers 0, 5. You wanted 6, you had to type shift 1, or if you wanted 9, you had to type shift 4, to add 5 to whatever digit you typed. Or imagine its display screen only showed 4 digits, so if you were working with an 8-digit number you had to scroll sideways to see the whole thing. Those limitations would slow you down, because you would have to do extra steps. The difference between 32 and 64 bits is a bit like that. The 64-bit computer can do more calculations in one step rather than two, so whatever it does faster. Imagine you want to send a mail to your friend, but you can only write 32 characters in a mail at a time. So in order to send a sentence of 50 characters, you have to send 2 mails, which requires more time and work. Now, however, someone invents a new kind of mail where you can send 64 characters per mail. So now your 50-character mail can fit into a single mail, and thus you have reduced the time and work to send the information to your friend. So basically it is about bandwidth, i.e. you can process more data in 64-bit per operation. If you have 64 fingers you can count twice as high as if you only have 32 fingers. Except that with binary, it's 264 versus 232, so exponentially larger numbers can be handled, or just twice as much data per operation. The very obvious one is in graphics. 8-bit graphics allowed 256 colors absolute maximum, whereas 24-bit, which is actually most common, allow 224 16.8 million colors. This is about the most you can see, so they use 8 bits per channel, red, green, blue per pixel. 24 bits. This value is called the native word size, and it determines the maximum number size a processor can operate on in a single step. A 32-bit computer can work with 64-bit or even larger numbers, but it has to split operations into multiple steps. For example, to add 2 64-bit numbers it would need to take twice as many steps. In practical terms, this makes it slower when working with large numbers than a 64-bit computer. This is an oversimplification, but it's the gist of things. Think of 64 and 32-bit as packages handled by a post office. A 64-bit package can contain far more information than a 32-bit package. It's like the difference between a postcard and a book. The computer is the post office and spends an equal amount of time sending and receiving 32 and 64-bit packages, but because 64-bit contains far more info than 32-bit, it has to move far fewer packages. Imagine sending the novel War and Peace by postcard instead of one book. The 32 or 64-bit is the size of the register. Registers are these buckets that hold values when calculating large numbers via operations. If the register is larger, complicated operations like multiplication or division, subtraction, and addition take far fewer processor operations to execute. That's it. So, certain applications, at least core functionality processing, will work close to 2x faster on 64-bit on the same clock speed. It's like playing Scrabble. With that many letters you can get more descriptive words with more letters, which is why, for example, 8-bit color images don't look very good. You could also use a lot of short words instead of one long one, but that's clunky and slow. But also you could have 64 letters and not know or utilize them efficiently. So it doesn't necessarily mean faster or better either. You want to tell me how to do something? If you can say 32 words in a breath versus 64 words in a breath, you can see how the 64-word scenario would have the ability to tell me the instructions in fewer breaths. 32-bit versus 64-bit represents the size of each block of information that can be processed. There's a bit more to it, but this is the ELI5 version. It just means the CPU can work with 64-bit chunks of data, which means it can move more data around in one go and address more memory. Which is why 32-bit Windows is restricted to only 4 gigs of RAM. It's registers, which can be thought of as a hyper-fast memory that the CPU can directly access for its calculations, are also 64-bit. Well, 8-bit gives you 256 unique values. If you use these as byte addresses, you can only address 256 bytes. 216 gives you 65,536 bytes, which was a massive upgrade. 32-bit allows you to address 4 gigabytes, so this is effectively your maximum RAM size. 64-bit allows us to smash through that limit. Think of the bits as fingers on your hand. You can only count to 10 because you have 10 fingers. This limits your ability to do math. Magically, you now have 20 fingers instead of 10. You can do much more math now. To computers, everything is math. The more math they can do, the better they get. It's how much information can be processed at once. Imagine it like words on a page. Books for toddlers have 1 or 2 words per page, 6-year-olds have a paragraph per page, and 10-year-olds have pages full of words. More words per page means you can process more information faster. A mega superhighway in East LA has been upgraded from 8 lanes of traffic, to 16, and then to 32, and then to 64 lanes wide. That's a lot of cars moving. Now a data bus in a computer is upgraded similarly. 8 conductors, to 16, to 32, etc. That's a lot more data moving. 32 or 64 are the bandwidth of a computer's instructions. The CPU of a computer takes in 32 or 64 bits and does some kind of instructions on that. Bigger calculations that don't fit in this have to be split into multiple instructions and have to store some temp result. A postal code is typically 6 digits long. But if you had a really big country, and you wanted every parcel of land to be contained within the same postal code system, you might want the postal code to be 8 digits long instead. You can drive a Ferrari to go get just milk from the neighborhood store, but you can do the same using a bike. Depends on what you plan to do on the computer.